Why don't we get started with you, Jules, if you would just briefly introduce yourself, the district, and so on.
Sure. My name is Jules Walters, and I am a resident of Westland. I'm also the mayor of Westland, and before that I was city councilor in Westland. I'm originally from Santa Monica, California, went to college in San Francisco, and moved to Oregon 15 years ago with my husband and my then 3 children. I now have 4 children, ages 24 to 14. And HD 37 is Westland, Tualatin. It's also Durham, and a little bit of Lake Oswego, and including River Grove.
Okay, and your party affiliation?
I am a Democrat. I'm also nominated by the Independent Party of Oregon and the Working Families Party.
Okay. All right, so you're already a public official holding the position of mayor in Westland. Is that a paid position?
It is. It makes a whopping $8,500 a year.
Okay, but so it's a part-time position?
It's a full-time position.
You just don't get paid very much.
That's
okay.
right.
Why do you want this job?
I just, having served as mayor of Westland, which has been a great privilege and I've enjoyed it very much, I think, especially when we talk about issues like tolling, it's very important for a local lens to be in Salem, who understands that one size doesn't fit all across the state of Oregon. I also, have partnered closely with the current representative, Rachel Prusak, whom I have great respect for, and our values align, and so I want to make sure that we have somebody in Salem for House District 37 to carry on those values.
Okay. Isn't it Oregon law that you can hold a school board position and serve in the legislature? Can you remain mayor if you were to win? Would you have to resign as
You can't
mayor?
hold 2 positions that pay.
Okay. All right. So you would have 2 very poorly paid positions, so you'd have to give up one.
Yeah, but my degree is in journalism, so it's like I'm used to it, right?
Got it. Okay. All right. Great. Eric, please introduce yourself.
Of course, yeah. My name is Eric Estep. I live in Westland with my wife Leslie and 4 boys. I have 4 boys under 5 or 5.5.
Wow.
He would confirm it's 5.5, it's not 5. And I've lived in Oregon since I was a boy, and have lived and served and loved Oregon since I was a boy. I have currently work in the mechanical contracting industry, so I work for a local contractor and do HVAC, plumbing, those type of jobs. And also have served at the city level and advisory boards, and currently serve at the county level with the Clackamas Economic Development Commission. I'm in the Clackamas Workforce Partnership as well. I'm on that board.
So are you actually yourself trained as a plumber or as an HVAC technician, or?
I'm currently in a sales type project management role, and I started in the sheet metal side. So I was HVAC installer and then a service tech.
Okay, great. Have you run for office before?
I've not. This is the first attempt at elected.
So what drew you to this race?
Yeah, one of the big drivers for me is I've had far too many friends leave Oregon because they've said it's not being taken care of, it's not being managed well. And like I said, I have 4 children at home, and I want this to be a place for them to not just grow up as children, but to raise their families and run businesses or work in business and build lives. I want that to be a given 20 years from now, and I think you need to invest now to do that. So rather than sit at the kitchen table and complain, I decided to run so that I can be one of the leaders and one of the stewards of this state.
And is there, in addition to sort of the general idea of wanting to preserve the state for your children and for others, is there a particular policy issue or area of focus that draws you to the work?
The ones that come to mind, Mayor Walters already mentioned tolling is a big one for the district, but homelessness comes to mind. When we drive by, my 5-year-old will ask, Papa, why do people live in tents? Mm-hmm. And I think that's a clear example of the mismanagement of the state. We've rhetorically talked about lack of housing, and that's the cause for homelessness, but really those root causes are drug addiction, are mental health issues, and we're not organizing or managing around those type of ideas, and we're funding in ways that is around how much money can be spent rather than what outcomes can actually happen. And we're funding in ways that are ineffective because of that.
Okay. I want to ask you both about tolling. I'll start with you, Mayor. I noticed that you put that in your voters pamphlet. So tell me your position on tolling.
So the big picture for me is that I'm a big supporter of infrastructure funding, having proper infrastructure. I think in Oregon we could be doing better. A lot of our infrastructure is in disrepair, not seismically upgraded or safe. So that's really important to me. And I've also, as I said, lived in San Francisco, so I'm used to tolling. So it's not something that I am inherently against as a funding mechanism. It's just that this tolling plan is completely flawed. And we're already impacted in Westland, in Tualatin, in Wilsonville, in Canby, Oregon City, with diversion traffic for people getting off I-5, off of I-205, cutting through our neighborhoods. And you know, we just spent a lot of money redoing the historic Willamette corridor. That's just a parking lot in the evenings. And
Because of diversion.
because of diversion. The first tolling gantry they've decided to place after Stafford Road, which is where people are getting off of I-205. So it's just going to double the amount of diversion from people now trying to also avoid a toll.
So the issue, the part of tolling that you object to is their lack of foresight to figure out how to stop people from diverting into local roads?
And they're working on it. That's part of the federal NEPA study, and they're required to mitigate for the impacts of diversion, but we have not seen the results of that study yet. But so far, I mean, one of the last meetings I went to with the I-205 Diversion Committee, an ODOT representative asked me what my ideas were to solve it, and I was like, are you kidding? Like, you're the transportation planner. So I'm just not feeling a lot of faith in ODOT at the moment. And we also have Highway 43 in Westland that goes from Portland through Lake Oswego to Westland, which is in terrible disrepair. It's an ODOT-owned highway. We call them orphan highways. They do not want to fix them because they are required to do ADA compliant sidewalks and corners on them. And that is, well, from what I've heard in meetings, is that it's too expensive for them to do that. So I just don't have a lot of faith in them at the moment.
So just to drill down on that a little bit more, are you generally in favor of the concept of tolling it's too late in the day for me, pricing, what's the word?
Congestion
pricing. Or are you generally not in favor of congestion pricing?
I think it depends on how it's implemented, the cost, where it's going to be. You know, I am in favor of ways to, you know, support climate action. I would love to see less cars on the road or more electrified cars on the road. But we do not have that infrastructure. We do not have proper public transit out to our suburbs in order for those that are most inequitably impacted by congestion pricing and tolling, which are people that have to, you know, those of us that have to live farther out to be able to afford housing, then have to use cars to get to work. They are going to be the most disproportionately impacted. And I haven't heard anything coming down the pipeline yet about how they're going to mitigate for that inequity.
You mentioned tolling as well. Do you have a different, are there differences between your position on tolling and the mayor's, or are you pretty much where she is?
More starkly, I'm against it as an idea. I think, as she did mention, it does impact, unequitably impacts those who most benefit from just driver being able to be mobile. That's the poor, that's minorities, and it's more a desire to, in my view, change traffic behavior, not build up funding for roads. I think there are far more efficient ways to do that. The current gas tax is a very efficient way to bring in funds. Obviously, there are going to be more and more electric vehicles. We currently have an opt-in system for electric vehicles. I think that's ridiculous. It could be a mandatory system, and that would mitigate some.
What do you mean, require people to buy electric vehicles?
Not, we have an opt-in system for paying into the road fund. If you have an electric vehicle, obviously anyone buying fuel is paying that gas tax. So if you have an electric vehicle, that should be a cost held evenly regardless of type of vehicle. So I think that's one way to mitigate the need for highway funds, and I don't think tolling is a good way to do it.
So, part of the impetus behind tolling is to come up with the money to pay for a new bridge to Vancouver and to pay for other highway improvements that really can't be paid for with gas tax money because there's not enough. I mean, you've probably looked at the ODOT financial projections; they're broke. So, do you support building a new bridge to Vancouver?
I'd want to look at that, whatever proposal. I think we're back to talking about management of funds. We have a $120 billion budget in Oregon that's increased by $50 billion in the past 6 years. If that's a priority, we can fund those things. We can take the funding we get from the bipartisan infrastructure framework and use those to the things we think are most important. I think it's a little bit of a red herring to talk about tolling and then talk about these different projects. I think tolling is something that the current administration wants, and I think we can do the appropriate upgrade projects within the budget we have and plan for them. It shouldn't just be let's get more fees or more taxes and just keep increasing this pot of money without any it's not being managed well. So it doesn't seem fair to say, well, we'll just get more because we're not managing it well. So.
Okay. I'm curious, are you both knocking on a lot of doors? So what is the issue, we'll start with you this time, Mayor, what is the issue that you're hearing about most from people whose doors you knock on?
There are two in this district that are most important. I would say three, but the top two are tolling, number one, and women's reproductive health care rights. I would also add that public safety is the third. Okay. And we're hearing about women's reproductive health care rights, not just from women, but from men as well.
Okay. Eric, what about you? What issues are you hearing about?
The two I hear the most are homelessness and the desire for public safety. People just communicate they feel less safe than they have in the past, and they're concerned about it. Especially in our district, it's one that can be a bedroom community. So commuters, and they live there for a reason. They want to be safe, and now they're seeing it as less safe for their families that they're trying to raise there.
I haven't spent a lot of time in Westland in the last year. I've been there many times, the last 25. Is there a homeless issue in Westland itself at this point?
I've seen, as my 5-year-old can point out, I've seen tents here and there. It doesn't stay visible as much as it does, say, in Portland or on some of the more thoroughfares. But I think for the district, but also for me, it's less about a visibility thing. It's more about a care thing. It's a bedroom community, so they're commuting to different places, whether it's for sports for kids or to their jobs, and they see it, and it's a growing thing. So I think they notice it from that perspective, and I don't want to work on homelessness just because I don't like the visibility aspect. I want to work on homelessness because those are neighbors that we need to care for, and they're not being cared for.
I think, were you elected after the Fesser scandal?
I was when the story broke, I was on city council. Okay. When it actually took place, I was not on council yet.
Okay. So that was really a black eye for your city? Absolutely. So what have you done as mayor to change the culture of not only of the police force, but of City Hall?
So the first thing was when the story broke, we had a council chamber full of television cameras and reporters and really angry community members, rightly so. I stated, and I still do hold myself accountable to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. And so we've worked hard. First thing I did was ask for an equity audit, a racial equity audit of all city policies, including police department policies. We then hired an independent investigation firm, OIR Group, to look at the Fesser case and how it was handled by the Westland Police Department, and it could have been done differently and better. And that was really helpful. I put together a police oversight task force. So this was a task force to help us create a police oversight entity, which we are now actually on the November 7th agenda. We will be discussing how we're going to implement that task force, or implement that board. So it'll be an oversight board to the police department made up of community members who hopefully will have, experience in law enforcement, also from different, racial backgrounds and, all sorts of different experiences from people who have different interactions with the police. And they will be in charge of looking at, when somebody makes a complaint, even a simple complaint, we're making sure that that goes through the oversight committee so that there's some transparency and we can continue to rebuild trust with the police department. We also fired the police chief, and it actually wasn't Chief Kruger who was the one during that actually called for the arrest of Michael Fesser. That was Terry Timius, who retired, was asked to retire, I believe. And then Terry Kruger was let go, and then we brought up Captain Peter Mahuna is now our police chief, and it's the first BIPOC police chief we've had in the history of the city. And he's doing extensive community outreach work with different nonprofits, including building bridges. So having dinner with and community meetings with all sorts of diverse individuals here in Portland and Westland. What else have we done? There's a tremendous amount of work. We also have hired, what I really love is we've signed an agreement with Lake Oswego, Mayor Buck and I. We have a behavioral health police officer that is actually employed by the Lake Oswego Police Department, but we pay for some of her salary and we split her time so that when we do have an incident that might involve somebody in crisis, that we have a behavioral health person there to respond with the police officers and de-escalate, and then continue through that to find support and helping for that person. So, I feel like we've, as far as the police angle, we've really moved forward from where we were of having this police chief who, did a favor for a fishing buddy and almost got, a black man from Portland killed with this false arrest. And I feel like we've come a long way from that, and there's still work to do, obviously, but everything is a work in progress. I will continue. I really want to make sure that this police oversight committee is set up and get ready to start working before I resign as mayor.
Okay.
Is that enough information?
Yeah, that's very helpful.
We've also done community work as far as DEI work. We had a Juneteenth celebration this year. I was the first person to introduce a Pride proclamation for the city in 2018. We had the Pride flag flown over City Hall for the first time ever this year in June. Hopefully we will have a Pride event next year. We were unable to do it this year because we were focused on the Juneteenth event and making sure that was successful, but hopefully we'll have enough staffing to do both next year.
Okay. Eric, for you, if you were to be successful and win the seat, what would you think of as the bill that you would first introduce in Salem?
The first bill would be regarding tolling, just striking the language of tolling from statute. That'd be the first emphasis, and then I'd be back to emphasizing homelessness. I want to really look at how that funding is being put forward and make sure that continued funding is attached to actual outcomes, actual positive outcomes for the homeless population, rather than just dollars spent or something of that nature. I like the Built for One platform and trying to bring together the multi-varied organizations and players in those spaces and allow them all to work together and be able to go individual plans for everyone, and make sure there's a framework like that to be most effective.
Okay. You're running as a Republican, and you haven't held office before, so maybe this is a tricky question, but one of the things we always ask candidates about is their independence. So, you know, we're looking for candidates who think for themselves and don't just follow the party line, and who may be able to work with members of the other party if they get to Salem. So is there a place that you would say, I'm not just a party line Republican, I've got, you know, here's an issue on which I differ from many of my fellow Republicans? You know, we had, for instance, former Mayor DeRimmer, who's running for Congress from Happy Valley, came in the other day and she said, yeah, I am pro-choice, and many of my fellow Republicans disagree with me on that. You know, that kind of thing.
Sure.
It doesn't have to be that big an issue. Could be a small issue.
I do think of myself as quite independent, and not I'm going to go sit in this party platform, and that's where I'm not comfortable in that. I'm more comfortable in thinking for myself.
Okay.
And I do think one of the ones that comes to mind is probably immigration. I'm a big proponent for let's increase the level of legal immigration. I think that is obviously a little bit more of a national issue, but seems to be a driving one for some in the GOP base. And I just see our country as one that is built on immigrants, is built on a welcoming posture in that, and would love to see a bigger welcoming posture and a framework that allows that to happen easily.
Okay. Same question for you, Mayor. Where do you part ways with some of your fellow Democrats?
You know, knowing the Democrats that I know that are currently in the legislature and those that are running, I feel like our values really align. So I don't think there's anything that I would, you know, what I would say is, being a policymaker myself already, sometimes you have to concede certain issues, or to come to consensus, you have to work together. And so if I ever got to a place where I felt like, as a group, the Democrats are moving too far away from our true values and towards, you know, just in order to get a bill passed, or I think I would say, like, let's take a time out and look at this again. So if it's anything against workers' rights, social justice, access to healthcare.
Yeah, but those would all be places where you're actually with the Democratic orthodoxy. So any place where you say no, I mean, tolling, for instance, a lot of Democrats favor tolling, you don't. So.
That's right. Well, because I don't disagree with tolling in general, just this particular plan. I mean, listen,
tolling's good for other people, but not for
No, not at all. I mean, as I said, I've lived in San Francisco. Yeah. When you're driving across the Golden Gate Bridge, you cannot divert, right? If you're in a car. In this plan, you can get off the road at any place and cause, you know, havoc in the evenings and mornings for people that live in our town. I certainly support, as I said, funding infrastructure. Whether that's, I mean, when I ran for council, I said, you know, they're either going to tax you or they're going to toll you. The roads aren't going to fix themselves. And I absolutely believe that. So we have to find a way to properly fund our infrastructure in the state of Oregon. If you talk to, I know mayors from the Oregon Mayors Association, you talk to people on the coast, 101's crumbling. And they call ODOT and they're like, we just need a lighted sign that says detour, and they can't get it. They can't get it. So there's a huge funding gap here that's really concerning, and I don't know where the money goes. I mean, I show up on meetings, ODOT's running a PowerPoint with 4 or 5 people on that call. It's like, how are they paying these people, but they can't get a lighted sign out on the coast to make sure people don't fall into the ocean.
Okay, let's shift to a couple of very quick questions. Measure 114 is on the ballot in November. It would make it more difficult for people to buy guns through a licensing process that's more involved than the current permitting process, and it would also reduce or limit the number of bullets in a magazine to 10. Where will you vote on? How will you vote on that bill?
I fully support the measure.
Okay.
Gun violence is now the #1 killer of children in the United States. So we have to be doing everything we can to pass common sense gun legislation.
Eric, how about you?
Yeah, I've looked at that. I want to be able to look at legislation that reduces or eliminates events like Uvalde or even Bend. And I think adding that kind of language without engaging the laws we already have on the books is a little bit haughty if we think we can just put some more letters on the page but not enforce the things we're already doing at state and national levels. For instance, the red flag laws, we have them. They're nationally known as an effective means of deterrence, but people don't know about them. They're not enforced, and something like this measure further puts work on the shoulders of our public safety officers and organizations. They're already underfunded, they're already understaffed, they're already overworked, and I don't see it as going to be effective. I see the ideal that it's sought for, but I don't think because of the way we are currently managing that adding additional things like that is going to change things.
Okay. There's also a measure on the ballot that would amend the Constitution to include the concept that health care is a right in the Constitution. It doesn't. It's a little bit vague. It doesn't really cost anything, allegedly, and it doesn't really. It allows people to sue if they don't have health care, but it doesn't really allow them to recover anything because they can't change the current funding balance. So. Anyway, you know the measure I'm talking about. How will you vote on that one?
I'll be voting no on that as well, partly for the ambiguity of the language you just described, and then again, our government as a state has proven to be ineffective in managing programs and managing funds like that, and to make a good healthcare is obviously a good, and if we make that a right, it's really putting ourselves in a dangerous situation to fund things that we can't fund and manage things we're not ready to manage.
Okay. Mayor?
Yeah, I would be supporting that measure. People shouldn't have to choose food over their prescription medications because of cost. We know that insurance companies are having record profits. Last year, corporations had their highest profits in you could double check me, but last I read it was in history. So I think there's enough money there to make sure that people can afford quality health care and they have the right to access it. So I will be voting yes.
Okay. I'd like to ask you both to think of a question that you'd like to ask your opponent. Please make it a question that can be answered and not a statement. And the purpose of this exercise is for you to be able to illustrate to us, first, that you can ask a good question, and secondly, something that you would like us to know about your opponent. So I'm sure you both know a lot about each other by this point in the election. So Eric, give you a chance to go first.
Yeah, I think I would ask, in the legislature, the goal is to persuade and find compromise, find areas of agreement, or work with people who disagree. How would you posture yourself and work with people whom you disagree with at a large level? How would you work with them?
I think, I have a long track record of being able to work well with people. I think it's about having the hard conversations, being comfortable, talking about issues, understanding that people are different, they come from different places, see things differently, and so respecting that, but also knowing that, there's certain values that I'm not willing to bend on. I think that's, the answer.
Are you trying to imply that your opponent is unable to work with other people, or?
Not necessarily. I just think there's at levels of more at the I'm thinking about metaphysical level. I'm thinking about philosophy and things like that. Whether it's religion or disagreements at religion, or you've talked a lot about LGBTQ issues and things like that. If someone disagrees on those levels, how would you work with someone? How would you? That's a pretty base level disagreement.
It is. So I'm not sure. There are certain things I'm just not going to bend on, right? So, not allowing people to have their human rights is not acceptable. But, I could have the conversation with somebody who's interested in explaining to me why they feel that way, but it's not going to change my mind. Yeah.
Would you like to ask Eric a question?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Eric, because I think he's been a good person to run against. I think he's had to run a thoughtful campaign, and so he's also been very, very kind and accessible. So thank you very much.
Of course.
I think the biggest issue for me, you just named one, so the biggest issues for me are rights for our LGBTQ plus community and marriage equality, and also women's right to reproductive health care, including abortion. And I'm interested with your religious views that may not align. How would you make those decisions in the legislature?
Yeah, I think what my religion tells me, at a base level, every human is imbued and full of dignity and honor and worthy of respect and honor. That's just a given for me, and that's how we should be interacting with people. So that at a people level, that's how I choose to interact with people and strive. Regardless of whatever disagreements we have, that's how I want to engage people. I mean, I think I've done that in my life and in the way I interact in community groups or however those things work. I think at the level of abortion, I've heard it mentioned by either the Democratic gubernatorial candidate or the Speaker of the House or even yourself that that's an issue that is protected in statute in Oregon, which is a different scenario than most other states. So that's not something I see as what this race is about, because it is protected in statute. I do think I would love to see, for instance, third trimester abortions, if that could be dialed back and restricted. I think third trimester abortions is a pretty radical idea, and I think that would be a good change for Oregon. And then funding of out of state abortions as well, especially where a lot of this race is about inflation and costs and the ability for the state to manage funds. And I don't think that's not a good way to manage funds in a time of high inflation. So those are two of the things I think, but from the words of those different candidates and even yourself, that's something protected in statute. So not something I think is in play really in this election.
I just want to follow up because I'm not sure I got the nuance of your question. Are you asking, so for instance, the mayor said that she was the first to fly the pride flag above Westland City Hall. Did I get that right? Are you okay with that?
That's a freedom of speech issue. The flag, I wouldn't have flown the flag above the Westland City Council, but it's a freedom of speech issue.
Why not?
So I think we've done a good job in this country of not allowing we have no establishment of religion, and I think we've done a good job of trying not to establish religions, and I think we wouldn't want any religious group to say this is how we ought to think about these things, and I think that should hold the same for an ideology as well. And I think that's a way of thinking about the world, and there's clearly disagreement there and clearly differing ideologies.
Do you think homosexuality is an ideology?
I'm not talking about homosexuality in particular, but the flag and things of that nature. This is the way we're going to think about the world. I think that more so.
Isn't the flag saying people have equal rights, or what does the flag say to you?
I don't see it as a right thing. That may be a better. I'm not sure. How would we describe the what's being communicated with that flag?
I guess to me, it seems to be support for people who are LGBTQ+.
Because at a rights level, I agree, yeah, equal rights for sure, equality under the law and all of those pieces about
Yeah.
rights and how we organize ourselves.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I'm thinking more along the lines of talking about transgenderism in like elementary schools and having that type of posture in those type of scenarios. That's more on the ideology side of things, and I wouldn't want that seems like an establishment of an idea more than that's what I'm trying to get at, that piece there.
Okay. Lucas, any questions?
I'm just curious, I mean, you've talked a lot about homelessness. I mean, what is your solution for homelessness that you see in West Lynn? If people are out on the streets in tents, where should they go instead?
Well, in West Lynn, I don't think there's many in West Lynn specifically. I can go across the street and help with friends who serve at Father's Heart, and there's people there. But I think at a state level, if we can emphasize facilities, and I don't want to just make it okay for tents to be okay. So if we can have facilities and say, we're going to get you here, but then we're going to have a roadmap towards recovery, towards health, and fund that type of approach rather than just kind of waving hands saying that we're just going to have the tents here. I don't want that. It's not an ideal way for people to live, and it's not good for them. So I want to change that. Does that answer your question?
So are you willing to commit to building more, I guess, shelters in West Lynn, or what is your specific plan for housing?
Yeah, I think shelters, but again, attached to recovery metrics. I want people to get help, not just be housed in a different place.
Yeah, that's all I got.
Okay. We are out of time, so one question that we're asking all candidates in all races is kind of a fun question. It's not that much fun. If the world were going to end tonight and you were only able to eat or drink one food or drink before that happened, what would
Quite fun.
what would that food or drink be? Mayor, we'll go for you first.
I think the pizza amore at Pizza Shoals.
Pizza amore?
Yeah.
What's on that?
It's fresh basil and is it no, I can't remember the name of it now. It's like a ham.
Good. Okay.
Charcuterie.
Capicola.
Capicola, thank you.
Okay.
It's so good. It is the best. And I always order it with extra mozz, extra fresh mozz.
Okay. All right. Eric, how about for you?
I would say my wife's pumpkin pie.
Oh,
that sounds
We had
good.
pumpkin pie at our wedding, and it always reminds me, obviously, of Thanksgiving. That was like the E-Step family holiday growing up, and that drives me towards gratitude. And if this were the last day, if this was the end of the season of my life, I'd want to have a posture of gratitude, thinking about all we've been given, and that's why I'm sitting here. So,
great. Good answer. Okay, well, thank you.
Thank
you.
you so much. Thanks for taking the time.
Yep.